obviously a nice thing to be able to pass this across, because I think ever since the Instagram age, all of this has kind of got lost due to the way in which information is spread. I think, obviously, yeah, thanks for saying all that side, Craig. I think to kind of highlight how today will feel is that for my undergraduate, I did anthropology and then I did law. So everything, that way I approach things a lot of the time is really looking at it from a cultural point of view to see how weightlifting has changed as a culture, because all the programming that we do for me is more influenced by culture than it is by science. And the way in which things have been delivered over the years is you can see how different countries have different styles and to their training methodologies. And I think that's really what shows us how programming has got to where it is today. Just by naming the word Bulgarian, obviously you guys you have things in your mind that come into play when I say that. So that's something I want us to kind of really think about today, because ultimately our job as coaches when we're looking at programming is really about how can we apply the scientific principles, the evidence, and what we think works into the individual that we're dealing with, which ultimately for me is, really influenced by culture, lifestyle habits, as well as obviously surrounding people around them. So in terms of where all this is from a range of things. So my own experience from learning obviously came from a lot of the UK international coaches and international lifters, but as well as people from top lifters and coaches from Poland, France, Spain, Cyprus and Hungary, who have generally traveled pretty damn extensively. So that stuff's stolen. Obviously the weightlifting literature, I hope a lot of you have read, whether that's from the Russian guys or more contemporary sources. What I think it's really important to think about through the whole thing is that most of the scientific evidence we have from weightlifting is from the Russians back in the day, from the Cold War era, from the Iron Curtain. So we've never really questioned that, and we're not really that critical on that information. I think that's really something we still have to be skeptical of, for example, the substances people are on, etc. We've got academic literature, but again, very rare in terms of it being used on high-level lifters. They've usually been used in maybe youth lifters or development guys. So we really have to think. I think one of the questions Craig mentioned to me, someone was asking, was about the difference between novice and elite lifters. And the pool of elite lifters in terms of proper scientific literature is so small, apart from that stuff we had from Russia. The last source that I used is wading through internet interviews and the hell of all the rest that is online. So that stuff is really where most of us spend a lot of time getting stuff from, and I think naturally we're a bit skeptical of it. So hopefully we can bring together all the elements this evening into this wonderful mix of seeing how we've got to where we are. Craig, does that kind of pose any questions for you? I'm obviously going to go over what we're going to go through in a minute, but
so I had muted myself. I was away with the fairies, mate. You carry on. No questions come through so far, and exactly what we intended to cover.
Okay, can everyone see that screen? Does it work?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So what we will cover today, we're going to go through a tiny little bit about the needs analysis, because that's important for weightlifting. Like what do we need for an athlete to be a high level, whether that's high level relative to their own goals, and the demands of the sport all in relation to programming. The next part, we're going to look at the changes to the sport. So little things over in terms of the changes of exercises, the changes to the programming, and then little aspect, or quite actually massive aspects, but anti-doping, the introduction of females to weightlifting, and of course changes to the lifts. The last thing is pretty much the juicy stuff that we came here for, but the other two set it up well, is the training methodology. So changes through history. So we've got the Russian moving into kind of Bulgarian era. Then we've got the modern day era, where we've kind of got a strong contrast between, what we're seeing in the kind of amazing performances from the Chinese, and then what we see from, let's say, Western Europe and America. Okay. So weightlifting demands. I had to do a needs analysis on it. Every part of your mind and your body, pretty much, isn't it? Squeezed to death. So as a coach, we really have to think about the physiological and psychological side through the whole thing. And I think what we tend to find is what you guys would have been reading from the Russian literature, and even that when we were mentioning about the Ivan Abadjiev article, was that he demands every part of your mind and body till you die. And that's part of the process that he used. In the UK, I don't know about you, Craig, but people don't tend to come back if you destroy them like that.
Yeah, it doesn't really work like that. There's a bit of a bigger picture story that needs to be told with the athletes that we tend to work with. And we can't really break them like the Eastern Bloc do.
Yeah, such a shame. So obviously, the biggest factor I find in terms of programming that we were really behind in the UK on was the deciphering between speed strength and strength speed in terms of our training and where we need to be, how we're going to adapt the training methods to do that. So for example, we'll go over it later, but say the Kazakhs don't use pulls, at least before they all got banned. They weren't using pulls. Same with Abadjiev, didn't use pulls, mainly because if you do pulls, you do them generally heavier. So therefore the bar speed is slower, and, strength isn't their concern. We're trying to look for carryover for snatch and clean and jerk. Hopefully that makes sense and not too confusing, but we will go over that a bit more. Individual needs analysis, again, so we are really looking at what is that individual? Is it a mobility issue? Is it a strength issue? Is it a massive technical issue? And all three of those will immediately hinder your ability to use that cookie cutter program. So we open up the Russian manual. Here's year one of your training. Follow that. Off you go. In the UK, we just don't have that blank canvas or that 1,000 athlete pool. So that's something that's really changed how we program. The weight category dependent, we are well aware of that. So let's be honest. If you eat all the pies, Craig, gifting a bit more. But,
is this?
Can't cut
it's the opposite.
Weight,
what everyone else
48
does.
kilo.
Oh, whoa! I'm at least 47 right now.
All right. Competition calendar. So we know that as a coach, we want to be able to peak our athletes for that main competition. So we had it with Benjamin Hennequin. So he was the silver medalist from 2011 World Championships. As far as we know, the only properly drug tested athlete in that kind of lineup that could win a silver medal at the World Championships back then. But when it swung around to the Olympics, his coaches had peaked him so hard for his Paris home World Championships, he bombed out in 2012, and he just really struggled to hit those weights again. So that's something that we really have to consider, even if it's on a micro scale. If Craig's got his, I don't know, dad's birthday treat day or something, and he's going to go on a bender for 5 days, we can't be having strong training around him. It's going to injure him. So what methods should we use on Craig? Bulgarian, of course.
It's probably something to come back there, Kristian. The weight categorized stuff and the peaking cycle are a couple of things that we'll definitely look to cover, certainly in the next 3 or 4 weeks as well. So whilst we might not be able to cover them completely here, there'll be a topic in themselves in the next few weeks. Yeah.
I think a little anecdote would be really thinking about the ultimate tonnage going through the body of a super heavyweight guy. If he was doing the same reps as you, it would just destroy his body.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let alone he's probably might be fat and unfit, and we used to have a super heavyweight that when he felt tired, he would say he just needed more calories. And
I need a Coke. Give me a Coke.
He used to have apparently the Soviets used to have aspirin with Coke for the blood vessels.
God.
Anyway, I thought the 2 Red Bulls was enough for him. So, the snatch and clean and jerk performance are continuously providing coaches with insight into strength and weaknesses of the athlete. So unlike normal strength and conditioning, where I assume, Dean, you probably have to do a lot of tests, retests with your guys, we kind of see it on a daily basis with weightlifting. So it's something that we're kind of lucky to have as a coach. But it kind of means that each new cycle we have a new focus. So if you can see there, if we've got someone with, we've got the ratios to basically guide us. So if you are free now, I would go on to Google on your phone or on a browser, Waxman's calculator if you've not done it. And while I'm yapping away, you can type in your PBs, and it's all the variations like the hang snatch, etc. And that will enable you to have a little review on where your weaknesses lie, working off these ratios that mostly come from Russian texts. So, for example, we'd want 100 to 105% of their best clean. If their front squat's running that close, we know that it's pretty damn going to be hard to stand up from that clean, which, Craig, we had a few questions about, didn't we, I think, for you on your clean. And,
yeah, what was my clean was, in fact, my clean is probably in and around my front squat. My best clean is 110. Best front squat's probably about
which I think you can do.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So it's something that we have to think about. And we generally look at that for snatch, clean and jerk as well, the back squat ratios. But I'll go on the Waxman's calculator, have a little look for yourselves. So we don't want to spend too much time on greasy numbers.
I'm guessing that's the reason why you're not allowing me to back squat much right now then, Kristian.
Well, we wanted that Jimmy Roundback boy to...
My style is very prawn-like.
Yeah, you seem to get up from it. But it was the main concern was some people can come up with that rainbow spine and then they can jerk. And me and you, we don't like jerks. We need as much as we can get. And a good clean, good form clean helps that jerk.
Yeah, definitely better. Ish.
So programming, you should take into account factors, lifestyle and cultural factors. That's the first thing I ask. So I want to find out how many times you can train, how long you can train for, what time is that training. All those things matter, competition dates. Now, weaknesses and mobility, that's really where you start from a program. I think almost all the top coaches I've ever met, they always focus around that weakness as the first port of call. So we have a joke, I think Callard used to say it, who's one of the best coaches in the UK. He said, write down on paper your least favourite exercise all the way to your favourite exercise. And that's the order your training program should be in.
Yep.
Always that. Which is why snatch balance is at the top of my list, but I just kind of rub it out. Go on.
Do as I say, not as I do.
Well, exactly. So technical competency, and that's a factor where when we start looking at this history lesson on weightlifting programming, that's really where we come to a bit of a joke. So technical competency for most of the Eastern Bloc, China, Russia, etc., they all have technical competency by the time they're 12. We're talking about few adjustments, but the foundations are there. So we're basically 10 years behind by the time most of us start even learning strength training, let alone snatch, clean and jerk. Psychology, in and out of training and in competition. So as a coach, that's something that I think really battles this cookie cutter style programming of, okay, well, I need to do this because this is Prillipin's chart and this is going to create that change. And I think maybe we did that a lot with your jerk, Craig, was about just pushing the singles or playing around with certain variations of the exercise for the psychology of committing to it rather than the actual technical side.
Yeah, a lot of block stuff.
Exactly. On that, like pauses from the dip, bottom up, and and that's why it really challenges the use of what we call the cookie cutter program, because otherwise that would work. Full stop. Here's the sheet of paper I've used for 10 years. Off you go. World champion.
I think the psychology side of it's quite interesting as well. It's something that certainly a new, and we see lots of new coaches coming in. We even see new coaches coming out at the British Championships and things like that. I think the psychology side in coaching is probably the area where a new coach, and not for their fault either, because they're still new, they're still learning, but that's probably where the psychological support for athletes is probably where they probably fall down.
Yeah. And it's playing back and forth. Each, I have some lifters where we write numbers down on paper. This is what I want them to do. They go to the competition. The first lift looks fantastic, and you can maybe squeeze out a few more kilos. But you come to realize that this athlete is a competition performer, and in training they might not be there. And we have it on the opposite sides of the spectrum. Obviously, as a coaching higher level athletes, I'm more concerned with competition performance than whatever they do in training. But it's something that you have to think about if they're training alone in pure gym on a well, not a rusty bar, but let's say a thick, grizzly, 40 pounds commercial gym bar. Are you going to get the most out of their training in that time, or should you save the heavier sessions for when they're training with other people? And all those kind of factors really mean that we have to be on our toes. So that concludes the first part of the chat. So we're going to go on to changes to the sport. If anyone's got any questions, forever hold your peace.
Anyone wants to unmute their mic, ask any questions, you are more than welcome. Anything that's on the screen now.
When you're talking about new coaches and the mental support side, can you go into more detail about that?
Yeah, and it's probably more of it's maybe not even a personal thing, more on being able to relate to the athlete, being able to support the athlete in different ways. And that's not me suggesting that it happens with all new coaches. There's a lot of coaches that, and we look at the Dunning-Kruger effect, where you have a lot of, when you have a new skill and a little bit of skill and you think you know everything, whereas actually you then spend a little bit more time once you start to develop yourself really as a coach and all the information that's out there, you then go into a little bit of a spectrum where you suddenly realize that it's quite overwhelming and overbearing, all this information, you don't know anything, and then you start to come out the other side. I think it happens to all coaches. And I think it happens in different stages of coaches. I know coaches that have been coaching for 10 years and they're still in that really, really tight section of that Dunning-Kruger spectrum where they still think they know everything. And this is, as I said at the start, this is one of the reasons why I love to learn it. And I think that was Jess, wasn't it? I know I've seen a lot of Jess and some of the coaching stuff she's done with the handstand stuff. So it's definitely not just specifically to new coaches, but it's definitely something that I think new coaches could and should be aware of. Does that answer your question?
Sorry, I didn't hear that bit.
Which bit didn't you hear?
I think just the end bit you jumped, Craig.
Okay. Yeah, obviously I know that, I think it's Jess that asked the question. And I know she's coming through with lots of good coaching things as well as a relatively new coach. So it's certainly not specifically down to new coaches in itself, because I know loads of coaches that have spent a lot of time in that early stage of that Dunning-Kruger side of things. But it's certainly something I think new coaches need to be mindful of, is how to support psychologically.
Yeah, I think if we're looking at just a simple premise, for me, it's a case of mistake number one for coaches, especially in the competition environment, let alone maybe a heavier training session, is they approach each athlete as the same, or in terms of their own personality is the same. And more, since my coaches moved from coaching only men, probably working class men that you just shout at or slap them around the face, and then suddenly all these women are turning up, and they're getting confused, like, I can't just shout at them anymore. One, I can't hit them, and two, they're telling me all their feelings or their problems, rather than the male side. Like, for example, you, Jess, would message me and say, my knee hurts, whereas Omar would wait about 3 months before he even tells me when he needs to get an operation or something. That's the kind of level of honesty you'd get from a lot of male athletes. So it's for us, it's like, well, knowing how are you meant to respond to that in the training, how are you meant to respond to that in competition. And it's just simple things like, my coach, even if he'd messed up, he wouldn't let us know he'd messed up or that we're short on time. He would try and keep us calm because we want us to be focused. Breaking the panic, because you can't hide your emotions, is a problem, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And then the other one is just shouting at an athlete that shouting doesn't work. If you've got like a Zen style lifter, don't go crazy on them. Don't do the old hype up, slap them. And we had that with Ben, who said, I slapped his legs and he's like, I don't think it works for me. And I said, if you get this lift, I'll never slap you again. And he got the lift, so I can't slap him anymore.
I think that's quite an interesting one, because, and it's one I brought up in one of the first ones that I ran of these, in that in my first powerlifting competition many moons ago, somebody offered to hit me before my first squat, and I kind of looked at him and went, "Don't fucking touch me! I don't need to."
Powerlifters are the worst.
They are
the worst
absolutely
for slapping.
However, on my last lift of my last competition, I literally turned around to you and went, "Hit me," which I've never done. So it definitely has a time and a place as well. And I think that's obviously down to understanding the relationships between athlete and coach as well, which just takes time. It takes time and a lot of skills as well.
Yeah.
I think another message to say there, Craig and Chris, is that just maybe adding something to Jess there is don't be afraid to explore, and don't be afraid to challenge yourself in those environments psychologically. You know, as an early coach, especially starting out, I can hold my hands up and say I thought I knew everything, and you certainly realise very quickly that you don't know nothing, and that there's so much more to learn. But more importantly, that's where you learn your trade, and that's where you understand your own coaching methodologies, is by making those mistakes on the floor. If you don't spend time on the floor and, like you said, crafting your personality, you're never gonna be able to know what those mistakes were to build on those experiences. So I think it's really like, don't be afraid to try different things, but just be susceptible to learn what other people have learned from their experience.
Accept their opportunities to learn rather than just looking at them as failures and things like that. And I know obviously you've got a good guidance in Kristian as well, so that kind of works. There's a lot of people out there that either have mentors that maybe are still in that early stage of Dunning-Kruger than they would do. I think that answers your question, Jess.
Hopefully.
Yep. Good.
Perfect.
All,
Thanks, mate.
all groovy. Thanks.
Right.
Bring them all coming, mate. Bring them coming.
So changes to the sport. So moving to that, I did want to pop onto something Mehmed said to Aaron once before he lifted, but we'll go over that in a bit. Just remind me to say it, Aaron. Or you'll say it.
You'll bring up now.
So yeah, changes to the sport that really changed the programming and how it went. So we had the removal of the clean and press in 1972. So back then we'd do just like powerlifting, 3 lifts, which took its time. And that kind of changed the whole style of the bodies of weightlifting. So we suddenly moved away from these kind of muscle men bodybuilding style look where they could hammer up the kilos in the clean and press and keep up with the guy who was super flexible in the snatch. So that really moved us towards more of a gymnastic body type, and obviously kicked bodybuilding and things like powerlifting almost a little bit away from the lighter weight classes, shall we say. Females being introduced. So well, at least we know from quite a fair bit of research that women generally suffer in terms of heavy singles, but do well on a more volume. That's going to change how we're going to look at the traditional Bulgarian method, at least. Even things around certain evidence, which is contestable because they can't seem to prove it because it's very hard to monitor. But say like the menstrual cycle causing issues with regards to increased injury rate at certain times of the month, or even stronger at certain times in the month. I think that's something.
A lot of that in squat with the powerlifting side of things. Yeah,
but it seems very hard to monitor unless you're on a nice individual basis. So anti-doping poorly enforced from the 1980s out of competition pretty much until this year. So this year they made that every lifter that wants to compete international, let them know their whereabouts for several months before. Everyone had to. Before we didn't have to do that. Obviously in the UK, all the top lifters were on Adams, so their whereabouts system. So 1 hour every day they had to let them know where they were so they could come and test them. Obviously in like Belarus, Georgia, Russia, like they probably rang them a month in advance and said, we're going to come test you on this date if they did it. I think the Georgian Anti-Doping Federation did three drug tests in the whole year out of all sports a few years ago, which is a cracker. So we have to really think about what field we're on internationally in terms of how we can train and what extras people might be taking. Obviously in the UK and quite a lot of the Western European countries, USA, Canada, Australia, the out of competition testing has been better, and not to say it's been perfect, but generally speaking, since the mid 2000s, everything's kind of really killed weightlifting till now. I would say that little dip in the mid 2000s was when pretty much the testing improved a lot in the UK. You couldn't just run away from the testers and hide in a boot like they used to, climbing out the bathroom window and things like that. So that's changed it. The massive factor that I think impacted the Eastern Bloc hugely, and the way that now we're starting to see Western nations come forward is really the move away from sports school system and the high athlete numbers suddenly dwindling away. So in Poland, when I went there, I said to them, I said, how many camps do you have? And he goes, it's terrible, terrible. They've cut so many camps. And I said, well, how many camps have you got a year? And the camps last about a week, 2 weeks. And he said 12. And I wanted to laugh in his face. So I thought 12 camps would be insane for Britain to do. We do like a few training days in the year. So they are struggling, and their system is, luckily Poland being closer to kind of developing really well, closer to Germany. CrossFit's booming, but the youth system, you might see a real emptying of the pool, because we are kind of mid-heavy. We've got a lot of amateur lifters, very few kids, and obviously very few elite. So that kind of middle ground, we are almost the best in the world, really, apart from USA on that side.
British are best at being average, is that what you're saying?
Hell yeah.
Kristian, we've got a question there just on whether you're going to elaborate on the difference between male and females there for prescription.
What's the specific? Is it literally just that question about male?
Yeah,
females?
the difference between training male and females. Obviously, females respond much better to more volume than males do with the heavier stuff.
Yeah, it's obviously dependent upon how long they've been training, their body weight category, and just the individual differences. So, for example, if we're just going to take an even person, so you would say, well, you could even take like Jess and Omar. So two top lifters I have, and Jess is on the chat. So Jess could easily do like 3 sets of 2 on 85% snatch, maybe even hit 90% for 3 sets of 2. When she's not lifting on a wooden board on grass, lockdown. But if I asked Omar to do 3 sets of 2 on 90%, he wouldn't be able to. He wouldn't get any of the second reps at all. And but he would be able to hit 100% that day for 1 rep, go home. Jess is a bit of a freak, so she could probably do everything involved in that. But that's because she hasn't hit the maximum she can, because she keeps improving. But say she reaches her same peak, she's training the same amount of time as Omar, she would fight. Generally, the science would say she would find it harder to hit that 100% as regularly as Omar, but find it easier to do more reps around that 85 to 95% range. Maybe 95 might be right on that border, but definitely 90% reps there, and then have a quick drop off. And I think that's very similar to squats, Craig, and the powerlifting. Right?
Yeah, that sort of thing is almost identical with the powerlifting side of things, and definitely find that certainly when you look at bench press or a female that is a single bench press, they can handle much more volume. They can handle and recover from much more upper body strength, so pressing work, back work, than most males can of their respective size.
Maybe we're just lazy, Craig, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm probably not training enough. Coach is not giving me enough stuff.
We've got man flu to worry about.
Oh, yeah. The COVID.
Okay.
Moving on. Hopefully, let me just check who asked that one. Amy, hopefully that answered your questions, Amy. If not, let us know.
I don't know why I put 3 stages, but it is 3 stages in terms of early period, Bulgarian, and then basically everything after that, because that's where we're really struggling to find a definitive change in the way in which at least the literature is speaking about weightlifting in the weightlifting world. So let's take the earlier period. So we've got the Russian side, the kind of they have ideas of like linear periodization and things like that. So it was very conservative through the 50s and 70s, just changing into the 70s. So we've got pretty much a very safe 75 to 85% working range reps, just building up slowly towards the comp. And you'd only really peak and go above that percent, about 85, for the last few weeks when you peak for the competition. So throughout the whole period, you are not competition ready. And that was basically a little simple critique of why the Bulgarians steamed in the 70s. So, and this is just a really brief, a really crude, rudimentary breakdown of what that period was like, because you have to take into account you've got individual athletes, individual coaches, and a lot of methods going on there. But that was the basic philosophy from that. And then it seemed like Britain only seemed to take the early stuff all the way till basically last year, where we didn't really seem to do anything about linear periodization. I don't know if you've all had the classic athletics coach starting the program off with 10 sets of 10 on about 20%, getting that principle of overload right in there. So if anyone's got any questions on that stuff, hopefully that's kind of where our basic level, if you do like A-level PE, that's kind of way they teach you everything about periodization as well, which is quite funny.
Yeah, it's the level 2 gym instructor's qualification. Well, it's been a number of years since I did that, and certainly the PT side of things, but 3 sets of 10 for everything generally is your initial prescription, which, linear programming has its place and it does a job, but obviously it's different for different horses for different courses.
Yeah, exactly. So what happened was we had this Bulgarians creep in and start winning medals with a tiny population consistently. And most of the methodology all coming from Ivan Abadjiev, which some of you would have read is crazy stuff. But we'll kind of go through it slowly, but just to brief the next part, in terms of the modern Russian, that's where we kind of really seeing them tease out some of the benefits that the traditional Russian programming had, as well as the Bulgarian stuff that introduced the philosophy of going heavier more often. And then we kind of have, in the last few years, we had Kazakhstan in its own world. So although everyone talks about China, you really look at how many athletes Kazakhstan had compared to China and the way they consistently produced outrageously, like 4 or 5 guys snatching 190 in the same weight class and things like that. Obviously, they all got banned, so that's fine. But they almost perfected the Bulgarian method, which we will see. So what we learned from looking at this kind of early period into this peak of Kazakhstan style is basically seeing the ultimate human weightlifting sportsman. So we're basically saying let's pretend the Kazakhs take drugs all year round, maybe cycle off a little bit for comp, even though they apparently, when they retested them, they're all positive. They literally took the mick and magnified everything Ivan Abadjiev thought and put that into an insane program of like 14 sessions a week, whatever you want to call it. Why that's useful for us is because it shows that ultimate spectrum of drug taking and weightlifting versus pretty much how my coach used to train when he was growing up, in the training in the 50s and 60s, then eventually going to the Olympics and finding suddenly everyone started taking drugs, and the whole atmosphere changed. So what Callard said to me a few years ago was that we need to forget everything that we learned in the last 20, 30 years on training, because it's all based around drugs and we should just forget it. That was his stance, because he found it so annoying that, on principle, you're on a completely different organism. You're a completely different organism off the drugs as they are. So how are we going to make the best clean lifter we can? And I think there's benefits from all the stuff that we have learned from all those guys, as well as all the previous stuff. What we're really missing is good numbers in terms of volume, tonnage, intensity, that we can actually prove worked to get someone to the Olympics or an Olympic medalist without any cheeky substances.
I suppose it kind of gives you an idea of ultimate human potential, but obviously it doesn't give us a blueprint as to, this is your guide as to, without additional supplementation, how to get someone to that potential, because you're never going to get there. But what is clean potential, I suppose, is the hardest question to answer.
And it brings us back to that cultural idea of like, well, I can't get you to train 14 times a week, even if you wanted to. That's that. As a British lifter, we don't have the time. Exactly. So today we've got this mess. We've got the West Side stuff coming in. We've got the academia from strength and conditioning, and we've got the amateur versus elite, all creating absolute confusion on Instagram. So let's try and clear this mess up. So periodizing programming, just talking about that simple stuff, exactly what Craig was talking about, but just to give you an idea, we're not here to spend 9,000 years on periodization, but we've got the classic start with high volume, low intensity, and then they switch as they go to the end. The classic linear stuff. And what we tend to find is, what they found is that at least on quite a few studies, that periodization, however you did it, didn't really make much difference in the end goal. So then it lends a question of, well, when should it be applied? And that's really why we have to look at what is the purpose of the periodization in the first place. So if we're looking at beginners, and I think exactly what me and Craig were speaking about earlier, the linear is quite nice because it teaches people a lot of reps at the beginning. So the repetition focus, they learn the technique, you don't overload them too fast, and they finish on the end wonderful. Then you've got the flip side, you've got a more advanced lifter. We start him with loads of reps. His bar speed is slower. The load isn't competition specific. The mental stress isn't there. He's actually working a bit more endurance than he wants to. And that changes for him everything he's built his top level tier winning technique on and performance on. So you won't tend to find these top lifters going back to those silly amounts of slow progress through that. They might go through an undulating week, but they might do 2-3 weeks of GPP or something like that prior to starting all that. The intermediates, however, imagine we never ever go back to that kind of basics, or say, even if I say, Craig, right, we're not going to snatch for 3 weeks, we're just going to do some GPP and try and get a little bit more power out of you. How do you think your snatch technique's going to be after 3 weeks of not snatching?
It's going to be ropey. It's
disgusting. Mine's disgusting if I have a week off. So we have to really think, for me at least, I think it's an advanced guy might be able to stay away from the full lift just for a few weeks and build in. So Tamas Ajan, the Hungarian coach, he does that. He doesn't let anyone do full snatch for at least 3 weeks when they start a program. This kind of takes advantage of the fact that a sports school kid will remember the snatch technique with their eyes closed. For a lot of us British lifters, we need that repetition when we need the reps in there. And then obviously with beginners, it's obviously an obvious question from that. But if a beginner has a horrific technique, I'm sure we'll all agree that we might have to spend a bit more time on complexes, mobility, and things like that.
I think that's probably where you find that for British programming, we spend a lot of time, certainly to begin with beginners. We do a lot of linear stuff, lots of reps, because technically we're not as competent as the Eastern Bloc countries and the Chinese are, because they've had that good 10 years ahead of us, unfortunately. That's probably why it works for us and maybe not so well for others.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think that's something where we really have to look at the individual from that. Like we're saying, to peak at the right time and reducing injury is really the only reason we're periodizing in weightlifting. When we're looking at strength and conditioning, it's a completely different question because you have a wider job than just snatch, clean and jerk performance. Mixed evidence on periodization, as I said. So again, I think you really have to think about logical stuff. You are periodizing them if you're doing it light for a bit and then building into a competition. That's natural. You don't need to slap a name to it on how you're doing it. When we really look at models, then they'll give you a good guide on how to do it. But as we can see in the diagram on the right there, the simple idea from training is you smash up Craig, so he's crying, his knees are exploding. He has a bit of recovery and he ends up stronger than he was before. And we end up waving that all the way up to a point where he's hopefully snatching. What do we want to make you snatch? Was it 100?
Is that body weight?
Body weight, Christ. That's our, we used to have that. I think we've had to move it up, but our elite stance at Brunel was like, once you snatch body weight, you're allowed to kind of go into the performance team. And obviously everyone's got better now. And now body weight. For light lifters, mate, you're out. You're out. Double body weight.
Oh, so 70 kilos.
Yeah. You've made it. You're back in. Manipulating the volume, intensity, and density of the exercise selection is really everything you have to consider, and exactly what all these Russian guys are masters at. And I think if you are a statistics kind of guy and a numbers guy, this is where you really come into play in terms of building that athlete through that period. So my only caveat with that is really to look at, we've spoken about this already, so we can wang through it. Let's go. So just in terms of the negative, not sport specific, because you're only ready for those last 2 weeks and hides issues at high intensities for the whole time. So if we spoke about psychology earlier, Craig, so just thinking about if that lifter's terrified of snatching 110 and he doesn't snatch above 100 for 10 weeks, he's going to be pretty terrified at the top end.
95% will always move your body into different positions than 85% will. And it's obviously having the confidence to handle that.
Yeah. So Craig comes up to me and he says, Kristian, I'm really struggling with the heavy weights. I'm getting scared. I'm waking up at night with cold sweats, dreaming about just 1 more kilo. I'm whispering to you. When we did Beaches and Barbells with Jack Oliver, I asked him, I said, every morning, can you come and give me a lecture? Because Abadjiev every day, he would gather all the athletes in the training hall. They'd sit them down on a bench like school children, and he would lecture them about how they're too weak, how they're letting them down, how they got to really focus on their training. And all he's asking is 1 more kilo. So if I did that to Craig, I'm sure he'd do fantastic. But here's your program, Craig. I've sorted it out.
Brilliant.
So after your morning lecture, I want you to do snatch 6 maximum singles. Then at 30 minutes rest, I want you to lie on the bench, that hard wooden bench. Close your eyes. Don't care if you don't sleep, but just close your eyes. Try and rest. Then you're going to clean and jerk max singles, 6 max singles again for me. And then front squat, 1 to 6 max singles. I'll see how it goes. See how prawn your back is. All right. That's session 1. See, Monday we do that. We do that 3 times.
Oh God.
But you get a good little day off on Wednesday. Wednesday we only do 6 max singles on power snatch, rest for 30 minutes, and then 6 max singles on power clean and jerk.
I can't be the only one already looking at what informal training is on Sunday.
I know in the Bulgarian documentary, The School of Champions, I recommend that on YouTube. It's a absolute nightmare to watch because the narrator has absolutely no personality, but that's part of the charm. They say, how many times do you train? And he says, we train 6 times a week and only once on Sunday or something like that. 6 days a week, only once. And I was like, what does that mean? But every day. So when we're looking at that, we're looking at the intensity of it. And if you've read the Ivan Abadjiev article, that'll give you an idea of why this approach was taken. So if I give the answer out to the, question out to the floor, why, you can type it in the question box if you want, or you come forward on the mic. What is different about this compared to what we usually see either in Britain or from other training programs, apart from the obvious being it's loads of max singles? Anybody?
Nothing. Shall I go?
We train like pussies.
We train like pussies. It's all classic lifts. There's no assistance. There's no nothing else.
Yeah, so incredibly specific to competing weights, yeah, and exercises, right? Yeah.
That's Olivia. I'm assuming that there's no
Sorry,
accessories. I think that means.
Yeah. So there's no accessories. Can you notice how there's no back squat as well?
How dare they?
How come there was no back squat? Like, what was the reason of that? So
Abadjiev basically got to a point where these guys were so strong, especially the heavyweight lifters. They were squatting, 300 plus, maybe 350 plus. It just made no difference. It was to a point of diminishing returns. So the front squat was still very sport specific, and the main priority. The other factor was it increased injury because of the weights they were using. So what you found is the lifters below 69 kg were still back squatting.
Oh, okay.
I'm guessing even with the supplementation that they had, there is only so much intensity and volume, or so much volume they can do at that intensity.
Well, you wait and see this Kazakh program. Mate.
Are you sending the in the post?
It's coming up. I've not given it to you. It's coming up.
I think what's really interesting is it's such a one-dimensional approach. It's so like it said in the article. It's such a simple approach.
Yeah.
To a point where you almost don't need a coach to tell you what to do.
No, exactly. If you watch him coach, he would just shout at you. That was all he was doing.
It was kind of like, what's your job? What the hell do you do?
Yeah. He was a psychologist. That's what he was.
That's what I mean. It's mad. It's absolutely crazy. But like I said, this is such a one-dimensional approach for me. I think that if you can play both parts well, you could have a great structure to a program. But like the Bulgarian, it works, but
it worked.
It works for a reason.
It worked. Yeah, but to what extent? You know?
Yeah.
Jeff has just said it there in the chat there. Zero techers work and no GPP either. I'm kind of making an assumption that actually that's probably the elite squad program, rather than an intermediate feeding into a elite squad.
That's the biggest point to it. So what we're saying is these guys have done Russian sports school system for at least 12 years before they're even on this squad, most likely. So, or let's say, 8 to 10 years in their youth. So this is exactly what Piros Dimas did. So they went from the classic Russian program that generally keeps you away from injury for a longer period, completely ironed out the technique, and the GPP stuff was done. After that, Abadjiev was relying on the fact that he had 100 lifters coming from the Russian sports schools, and at least 8 or 10 of them were going to come out all right on their system. Well, not all right, world-class, world record holders. But his nickname was the Butcher, because he butchered athletes.
A selection process had taken place, and only the elite came forward. Those that could cope with it.
So we suddenly have that block of what is our culture, what is our system we're getting athletes from, and then trying to apply something that is so foreign to our lifestyle, to all the backgrounds, to that GPP work, that accessory work that we're all missing. It's absolutely insane to think that you could just slap this on the UK people and off you go. But I think, again, it shows why did that method work? And it comes from the foundations that they had before. And that's the point that I think we find as coaches is building the foundations, being that long-term athlete development that we're searching for is really what makes a difference.
Yeah.
The injecting his lifters. Yeah.
Since they were 4 years old.
Well, I heard in Poland, one of our British lifters went to Poland, and you have chalk bins, you have chalk bowls, like bowls with chalk.
Oh God!
You just had bowls with pills in, and they would just, after the session, they would just take a handful and just swallow them, and the British lifter asked him, he said, how much you taking? He's like,
all of it. All of it.
Maybe we should start employing that in our gyms. I wonder how much we can get away with
that. Vitamin D, they love that now.
Yeah, that's good.
We have a joke about maca root powder as well. So it didn't start like this for Abadjiev the whole time. So the exercises dropped first to 8. In Spain, they had 6 gold medals. They started beating the Russians. In 1986, they only did 5, 7. And then in the next year, we had 7 again, and the Russians had 2. So basically, Abadjiev's logic was that by becoming so specific, he created these competition-ready lifters. But obviously, with the drug testing, they tended to drop off, didn't they? So this is that quote from his article. I'll let you guys read it if you want, but if you've read the article, you would have seen it. But we're just looking at and you see it with the Kazakh program, is a lot of it was about talking about the manipulation of adrenaline and that psychological switch on that this heavy training does to make that lifter adapt around that stress of maximum. But I'm sure a lot of research is now coming out that, as we know, that because stress, the body doesn't decipher whether this is athletic stress, this is life stress. Around our lifestyles, it's a massive problem for people with a job, university, kids, everything around that. It just builds up to a point where suddenly we're getting athletes that want to do weightlifting in the masters realm, and the Bulgarian somehow isn't applicable here. Crazy chat.
I think it's quite interesting actually, and I'm not going to go on a supple leopard beating because I quite like the supple leopard. I like what supple leopard brought to the industry, but it was one of Kelly Starrett's theories as well, with supple leopard being 100% ready all the time. A leopard is ready to go as soon as it wakes, it's ready to hunt. Obviously, it doesn't quite transition over to humans in that way, but it's quite interesting how it kind of comes back around.
Yeah, I think it is a really important rhetoric across all programming is about, in terms of when we look at producing weightlifters, we do want them psychologically to really know that when they're snatching, when they're clean and jerking, this is an important time. And when we're going heavy, it has to be focus. Otherwise, it's just never going to happen on a high level. I enjoy the lions spend 80% of the time asleep. It's like when vegans use the gorilla.
I've read that.
The gorilla idea as well. They sit on their bum and eat leaves all day. No offense to vegans, I'm just taking a look at gorillas. And if you want a bit of trivia, go and Google how big a gorilla's brawn is. You'll enjoy that. Make all the men feel a bit better in the room. Okay. So, right. What do they all do? So we know all programs manipulate the volume and intensity. So if we look at a classic, the Medvedev stuff, so if you want to look at a nice, even, well-rounded, bit of a mix of the Bulgarian stuff with the Russian, his program, multi-year planning, I put the title at the end of the PowerPoint anyway, that one gives you a really nice, smooth increase if you had a perfect athlete and a kid training for those 5-6 years. So we're looking at the weight classes, and we mentioned this earlier, Craig, about the volume being different, obviously because they're just lifting more. In terms of when we think about lighter lifters in the UK, we're usually just talking about skinnier people. No offense, Craig.
Shots fired.
But we have to more think about body type. So in China, the average height is lower, so they're lower weight classes. They're probably going to be a jacked 69 kilo class, which doesn't exist anymore, 73, shall we say. So it is something we have to take into account. And then when we look at the snatch, clean and jerk, can you see, for me, I think if you're going to base any, I think was it Amy asking earlier, someone asking about the female differences?
Yes, it was Amy.
So when we're looking at programs for most people, try in your mind to base this around the middleweight classes, the middleweight men and the middleweight women. That's really where you're going to get the adaptations come from there. If you start, like the Germans wrote their whole technical model around Matthias Steiner, who's a super heavyweight, which just seems insane to me. In the same way you look at technique, like Craig will look at lighter lifters for his technique. I will look at middleweight lifters for my technique. Programs you should be trying to get it from the type of people that you are, or the type of people you are training. And that's the same with, like we said about the cultural side. Right. So this is from Verkhoshansky and Sif. I'm sure every man and his dog, and Dean, you probably had slept with super training on as your pillow a few times. So that's a really great resource for all of S&C. What people I find funny is that most of Verkhoshansky's and Sif's data comes from the Russian weightlifters anyway. So we all do take it with a pinch of salt. But what he's saying here, the MV, so medium volume, medium intensity for 12 to 15 weeks per year. Medium to high volume, and then low intensity there for 9 to 10 weeks a year. And then those are the kind of combinations. I'm not going to read them all out, but it's definitely something to think about how you program your year for most athletes to remain least injurious. And that again goes back to, when is that athlete peaking for? I'll be peaking them for November. Well, make sure that they're not bashing out their hardest ever training in January if you want them to be in their best performance. And let's be honest, no one ever competes well over Christmas or trains well over Christmas, which is why the English champs in January was the worst thing I could ever imagine. I used to try and eat so little over Christmas, and then they moved the date. Okay. Right. So this one is blow your eyes off, but definitely have a look at your own time. What I would recommend is we look at just number one. So if you look on the left, training stages. So what it's saying is your 6 to 12 months. So your first year preparation period, 1.5 to 3 years. The training stages, each stage is 6 to 12 months. And then you've got the preparation period. So the first year, second year, third year, fourth year, fifth year, sixth year of training. How many times a week would you train? Number of reps per set, body weight growth of athlete. Confused by that one myself. How much we'd expect them to grow. Okay, and so age-wise, if we're looking at 10 to 11-year-olds, we know they're not going to be doing it full-time. We know they're only going to be training that once or twice a week. So we've got the weight classes, monthly number of lifts for those weight classes. If you're 10 or 11 and you weigh quite a lot, I'd be amazed. And then there's the loads as we expect through the lifts. So we're not even practicing snatch pulls in their first year, clean pulls. We're just doing squat exercises, some snatch and clean and jerk. The idea is that we're giving them exposure to the technique and we build through that as we go. You've also got the energy systems there as well to give you some idea. Notice the very little aerobic respiration there. I recommend you just Google that and sit yourself down, because I've only given you about a fraction of that chart. But the idea is that Boris took it from a lot of the Russian researchers and all the current ideas of volume and put that together in his spare time. And he was apparently a high-level lifter before. It's really just a chart of numbers taken from people like Medvedev, and everyone else like that. So if you're reading the Russian stuff already, you're not getting anything new, but it is a really nice picture to give you an idea of when a lifter walks to you. Craig says to you, I've got this guy, he's been training for 3 years. I don't really know how hard I should push him. Well, you've got a nice little bracket there to kind of base yourself off. And how much volume do we need? So how many number of lifts are we going to have to put into the program for that lifter to create the changes we need him to happen? And we spoke about that a little bit last week on the squats, as if it was too little to create that change, or if it was too much, we're going to cause injury. So that's something it gives you a nice little middle ground for that chart.
Yeah, kind of goes back to that minimum effective dose, doesn't it?
Oh, exactly. And it was funny reading about the Prilipin stuff. We only didn't mention it, but they're all based off snatch, clean and jerk, which is quite funny. Thinking about us using that as a snatch, clean, jerk. We don't even have the technical expertise to apply the Prilipin half the time. We'll miss all the lifts, Craig. Right. Okay. Any questions up to there? Because we're going to go on to the extreme version of Kazakh World. And how are we doing on time? I hope we're all still alive and still with me here. Cracked in an hour. Too much. Nearly there.
So far, so good.
Good. All right.
38, no one's died yet.
Good. So, so Kazakhstan. So this is taken from the stuff they were doing just before the whole team got caught and banned or whatever. A guy went to their training camp, got their programs, got it from Alexei Nee. And the reason Kazakhstan is such an outstanding thing was because, again, smaller nation in weightlifting terms, but really, really stood out on the after not winning any medals, suddenly started winning golds. And what the funny part is, question trivia of the day. He had a guy with him all the time, especially in 2012, hobbling around on a walking stick. Does anybody know who that guy was? Was he the coach?
I'm going to surmise he might have been the doctor.
You ruined it, Craig. Yeah, it's true.
Is it?
Yeah. So that was the same doctor that was for the Bulgarian team as well.
Farmer, yeah. Drug dealer, yeah.
The needle man.
Yeah. So
the guy knows the guy.
You've got the steroids.
Yeah. So you've got the guy. You've got the Bulgarian method, and the Bulgarians winning everything. And then the doctor moves to another team. And it's the same with the Badgev. He used to move to another team, and he moved to Turkey. They started winning everything, and it's just ironic as hell. So if we have another look at this program, so you've got, it makes me feel sick, but doesn't anyone feel like it's like a bender we need to do? We all need to just get on it for 1 week.
It's
and
like
see how
like a weightlifting version of pub golf.
Yeah. That definitely ends up in the hospital like pub golf. So take a little look.
It's like binge weightlifting.
Yeah. So I love the fact that there's no sessions, because you need that 20-minute rest between your exercises as well. So you're basically there all day. You've got that 12:40 to 5 o'clock, kid pop home.
I like that Thursday they allow you in the afternoon to do some deep jumps.
There you go. Just if your legs weren't ready, weren't ruined enough. So what we're noticing is missing from this program, but also added from Bulgarian. So,
There's definitely a training session missing on Friday afternoon, because they've got the time from 12:40 till 5 o'clock. Surely they can fill that.
They could have filled something in there. Yeah,
definitely. Like anything.
Probably McDonald's and a movie.
It's probably tricep extensions with a syringe or something.
I would, yeah. Time with the farmer.
So
Nothing on Sunday.
Nothing on Sunday. I told you, man. That's not even, what do you call it? Yeah, casual training, informal training. So let's look at this logically. So we've got little things like wave loading. So that's a change from Bulgarian, or at least going up and down and then back down. So we actually providing some sort of
undulation.
Undulation, but the reps are put in a little bit more than the Bulgarian program. So why might they be doing waves anyway?
Was that a question? Sorry.
Yes.
Like, was it for like a slight bit of rest before your next go, or psychological, just to make it feel so you go from that big weight down to the smaller ones? So if it was really light, you might feel stronger, then you go back up again, maybe something like that. Yeah, so there's a lot of factors. I think psychological one is a really good thing for waves, dealing with what you might happen in competition. If you get called out early or late, then you have to re-warm up and go back and forth. The other factor is really, for me, the biggest kind of message we get from the Kazakh methodology is about bar speed. So they don't do snatch. I could be completely wrong in this program. If anyone sees it, please call me out. No, I think they write it like reps and then sets. But they don't do any more than 3 reps on the snatch ever, because of the bar speed change. So it just, again, that Abadjiev logic of really thinking about how much slower is the bar going to go on my 3rd rep or my 4th rep? Is it going to change from the competition style movement of maximum rep? So if we're doing 90%, we know it's going to be fairly damn close to 100% in terms of psychology as well as good bar speed. But spending too much time at 100, we know the bar speed is going to slow down as well. So that's definitely a factor, I think, where they've really manipulated the Bulgarian system from that side. And obviously overall, by dropping down, you're getting that volume into that you wouldn't usually maybe get. And you've also got to think that they're actually doing so many sessions. 6 singles at 100%, maybe that's just killer. Again, notice there's no pulls. And yeah, Glenn, like a back off after heavy singles, yeah. So no pulls. Again, the bar speed issue, the technique change. So who can tell me the issues with the panda pull or the Chinese style pull from a technical point of view?
I hate that I feel like I should go when there's silence.
Using arms too much, yes. Good.
Is it
sorry,
because... Oh, yeah, no, sorry, I couldn't work out how to turn the microphone off. Yeah. Oh, and he's playing again. Is it because you like pull too much with your arms and then the bar flies too high?
So
something like that.
Yeah, it basically the no full extension. What Scott's saying. So people really struggle to hit proper extension when they do the Chinese pull. So you're not actually ever really making that top position you hit in the snatch and clean. You're suddenly gone. So you have to be a master at it. The arms will then compensate for it, like you said, Jess. And you'll pull it to your chin, but it turns out you're halfway squatting anyway. So you think it's really high, but actually your body's halfway down anyway.
Jake's not here because whenever I program Jake any form of pull, he just chucks in panda balls and then wonders why I'm having to go at him.
Yes, the athlete, they love it because it feels so high. And And then obviously there's still an issue with the Russian pull that you spend too much time up, and you could actually pull it up too high with your arms too. So
I think the biggest problem with that as well is that because they're so all over social media now, and there's such
100%, yeah.
Like they've now sort of been embedded into people's
I think
programs.
you see more Chinese pulls than you see normal pulls.
100%. Like people have forgotten the fundamentals and just like, I want to do the sexy shit that they're doing because it looks right.
It looks fast as well, isn't it?
Paddlepul's just become really fashionable, and people want to just do their heavy, really good-looking fast stuff, whereas actually their actual transition over to good technical movement isn't quite as good if it's not been done well.
I've never ever done a pull and felt like I could clean it.
No, let's put it bluntly, sort your basic shit out first before you
keep it simple, stupid.
Exactly.
Kiss is the way. Kiss principle all the way.
Exactly. And then obviously the third thing we're looking at here is we've actually got accessory work in. So that's amazing, isn't it? We've got stretching, hyperextensions, even some ab work.
Seated crunches.
It's funny because they're so focused on volume on this program, and like a lot of it, that their accessories, there's no stipulate. It's just body weight. Oh, that's all right. We'll just do a bit of body weight. But you've done all that shit today. It's fine. Don't worry.
Can anyone see any unilateral stuff as well? Does that even exist?
I don't think that's been created yet.
You don't need that when you're on gear. So
somebody please tell me what ab work is. I'd love to know what that is.
Well, you know, in the 90s when they got those little machines that used to zap your abs, like Cristiano Ronaldo had. It's one of them.
That's what you need. That's what they're doing in that break from 12 to
4-hour break.
There's got to be at least 5% of the people on this call that must still have some one of those in their cupboard somewhere.
Well, what about the shake weight?
Yeah,
the shake weight. One of those.
We don't need to record that, Dean.
So,
oh dear. Practice.
So from a like strength and conditioning point of view, the interesting part moving from the Bulgarian to the Kazakhstan is just the interesting points of and what works with clean lifters is the things like wave loading and undulating through the week. So finding ways that we can manipulate the bar speed and get volume in, as well as high intensity work without destroying them. And that's really something that is a massive skill when you're drug free, when you've got a busy life and you still need to get ready for competition. The rest between exercises, I think that's a really interesting point. Them having that 20-minute break. I'm not saying that that's ideal for everybody, but when we're looking at a competition, that might be the actual amount of rest time you have. But maybe on the heavy days, looking at really making sure your rest is adequate between, we have the classic, obviously 3 minutes rest minimum from the ATP side. But let's be honest that when we're dealing with competition scenarios, if you are following yourself and you only get 2 minutes, that's not 2 minutes. That's 2 minutes from them loading the bar and it times you out. So we might have to be looking at 1.5 minutes. There's pros and cons to having that perfect. We had an Albanian kid at Brunel, and his dad was absolutely insane. And I was at a competition warming up, and my coach was like, right, okay, do this lift, because we're looking at the competition build up. And he took my pulse rate with his hand. And he was like, no, he cannot. He must rest. His heart rate is too much. It's too much. And my coach was like, shut up. Leave this alone.
That was a great accent, by the way, mate.
Yeah.
Thank you, yes.
Nailed that one, Kristian.
I know.
Nice.
I spent many time.
Practice makes perfect.
You have to translate all the Bulgarian and Russian, so.
Love it.
The sport specificity. So we've got to think about where might we be starting these beginners and the intermediates and the elites, and that Kazakh program is purely elite, purely from that side of things. So we have to think about that foundation, exactly what Dean was saying, with get that right. If that stuff isn't right, if your technique's not right, smashing down 100% is absolutely going to be it's going to be a learning method, isn't it?
Do more damage than make progress.
So drugs change everything, and it's not. I'm not one of those that believes you can't do it without drugs. And I really do think there are so many freaks out there. We had like Zoe Smith from Europa, now working under Andy Callard. He said the same thing. He said, like, before he trained Zoe, he didn't think those kind of weights at that age was possible. And Zoe snatched 85 when she was 15, weighing 58 kilos, I think. Clean jerk like 100. So she's back squat. I think she back squat. She must have done more now. Maybe she hasn't because of just not needing to. But she did a 170 back squat, like paper, when she was weighing about 59, maybe 63, somewhere around there. And she said she'd never ever failed a squat in her life. She just always PB'd every time if she went heavy, which is just mind blowing to think how many times you've sat down, Craig.
Every time I've sat
down. Thank God for those catches. That's all I have to say. But the biggest factor that Andy Callard brought to the Britain, so he kept producing these high-level GB guys from this gym, and then everywhere else in the world is advocating this, heavy lifting from the glory days of the 80s. And what we found with Callard is that his emphasis is on volume, is on good form, is on not going heavy unless you need to. So his method used a lot more of the old Russian style that we've been talking about that was older, right? But still going heavy-ish, but through the week, heavy, medium, light, heavy, medium, light. That's the kind of how he would rotate through it. And when we mean heavy, we were talking, 85% doubles or something, but he would be doing a lot of 5-5s on pulls, a lot of 5-5s on squats and getting the reps in. Where we come to question that is about, like we mentioned before, about the bar speed and then the psychology of heavy lifts. So if you've got a lifter that can attack those heavy weights regardless, like Owen Boxall, he would snatch 140 maximum before he went to competition, and then he would go to competition and snatch 157, so 17 kilos off, and he just knew he could do it because he felt strong, not because he'd done it in training. But in a case where a lifter is really struggle with the psychology, that method is questionable, and I think that's where we can start challenging certain ideas on reps. But what it really raises is that, Craig, what you said about the minimal amount to create that change in the athlete.
Minimal effective dose.
That's really where Callard shows that when we don't take gear, we need volume, a lot of volume, to be able to catch up and make our bodies adapt. Because when that study was done on steroids, where they just gave people steroids and let them sit down, no exercise, and they got stronger, that's when we start trying to kill ourselves in terms of motivation from that side. So we can have a lifter do 3 sets of 3 on drugs and get way stronger, whereas a lifter without drugs might have to do 5 sets of 5. So that minimal dose there, we really have to start questioning in terms of the individuality. How much does it take a beginner to respond to training? Well, it's a hell of a lot less than someone who's been training for 6 or 7 years. And so that's where we looked at that increase in volume, increase in terms of that whole periodization period for that lifter building up to that comp. Is the one he used when he was 3 years in going to work when he's 8 years into the sport? And when we look at Emily Godley, she has done that slowly increased the amount she can do, increase those percentages over time, and gradually chipped away at that kind of, I think it was 1.5 to 3% increase every year, and then ended up winning that bronze at the World Championships. So it can be done. And she came from Keith Morgan and then went to Callard. So she's had a really good foundation moving through into that elite level. So the question I put to you guys after all my yapping, why is China the most dominant nation now? And the things to consider is comparing and contrasting those rival nations. Like we just saw the Kazakh program. We've got to think about USA maybe coming through. Do
we need to make the caveat that drugs cannot be an answer?
And drugs are obviously a given. So we're no, but that's the point. If Kazakhstan were on the drugs too, China on the drugs too, why were Kazakhstan producing from a smaller pool several medalists that really competed in terms of numbers there?
Yeah, cool. We've got a few coming through. So youth development, Amy's put out, obviously similar to the Russian system as well. And then Talisha has gone with body composition. They all literally look like bodybuilders. Size of the youth pool.
I think for me that youth pool's probably one of the biggest ones for, in my opinion.
One we miss out on.
Their athletic development programs from the start of 2 or 3 years old. It's so regimental and highly policed within their young sports programs. I watched a documentary. It's ridiculous how much time like a 4 or 5-year-old will spend doing insane amount of work in terms of sport specific programs. Yet I've got a 6-year-old that does an hour of dance or gymnastics each week, and she's hanging out of her ass. Like it's incredible the amount of work that they do.
Yeah. Discipline's a nice one, Gareth. I've got to go back to, I think it was Eva. Mentality is quite an interesting one. Eva, do you want to pop on and just elaborate on that?
Fear of death from Lee. That's brilliant. Fear of death. You're going to die if you don't pick up that weight, boy.
Cool. We've not got it coming through. So I'm going to, mentality-wise, I mean, I really like the ethos behind the Chinese methodology. Although clearly we know that supplementation has taken place, but obviously keeping the bar nice and close, and their discipline. I know Shepard's put discipline in there as well in how they kind of go about their training. It's something that obviously we as a British nation don't get the support nationally to do. But yeah, a lot of people there have got the massive pool of people that they have to select from.
Yeah, so I think there's some. All those answers have definitely are correct in their own way, especially the fear of death one is
very apparent.
Not funny, is it? It's not funny. So we really have to think about pretty much what a lot of people said with regards to the pool, the athlete pool. So when we're looking at, let's say, I think they said they have like 100,000 of those youth lifters. I think that's correct, what they said. Now, obviously that doesn't mean they're going to create the best thing. So it is the other factors that come forward. So what you said with regards to, there you go, there's Scott Blackmore, the very best genetically suited kids. So we're not only talking about a pool of athletes. Like in the UK, we could get weightlifting to every school there is, but they don't mind to discriminate on the guys with the short arms or the guys with the short femurs and long back. And have a natural girth around their thighs or something like that. They will discriminate. Whereas the UK, we everyone can come train as long as you don't want to train.
I mean, it comes like.
Go on.
That's right. Go on.
I was just going to say that I think Scott made a valid point there. That talking about the Chinese lifters as kids, they're driven into a system, and they're picked the very best genetically suited kids because, it's like you said there, it's the only chance to provide for the families. Like that is such a big psychological driving factor for those Chinese lifters.
Exactly where I was going as well. So I'll go back to the one I brought up probably a couple of weeks ago with the Talent Code, which is a book that I have on PDF if anyone wants it.
Great.
But they look at that they suggest that it's not a natural talent thing, it's a nurtured talent. And the comparison, and we look back at the football side of things with the futsal in Brazil, and they were nurtured because they played a style of football that meant they learnt their skill from a young age much quicker, but they also were fighting poverty like some of the Chinese are now. So the Chinese are not only having the opportunity from a young age, but they also have that opportunity to provide for their family. And we've also seen that when the Chinese come over to the UK, they are absolute stars. They go back to China, no one knows who they are.
Apart from Lou,
no idea. Everyone knows Lou is, yeah. Super.
So the little things, like we can joke about fighting for the life of the family, but if you win an Olympic medal or a World Championship medal, you get upgraded in your accommodation in the National Training Centre. So you get your own room, and you get a better menu. So you get tiger bone soup and premium food. So I don't know if that, for me, that would be the biggest reason I would snatch 175.
Food.
If anyone wants to offer it.
Food in a bed.
So I don't know about you, but I could imagine being in a full-time camp and sharing that goddamn room with you, Craig. Jesus, get me out.
Oh, I'd be looking after you. I'll be making your bed.
That's what I'm worried about.
Sounds like the army.
Yeah. So the athlete pool is obviously the one we said. Money for me is the biggest factor that drives all of this. So what we're looking at is the Kazakhstan. So we've got Kazakhstan. They had their finite resources, finite money. They got limited. Bulgaria, they had the model, they had the drugs, but they actually couldn't pay off the IWF. The rumours have it for escaping the tests. or they couldn't fund the kids to be full-time anymore. Those massive penalties, so they fell away. With China, they have a continual fund. At any time they have that money backing them. So it's a really big thing for us. Like, imagine in the UK, all the work, say, Stuart Martin's done to kind of make sure our youth program's got funding, is trying to create a sustainable method for these athletes to come through, on top of having obviously a nice athlete pool. And the methods. So that's why we're here. We're talking about programming. So the Chinese method kind of takes the benefits that we've seen in the Bulgarian method, combined with the safety of the Russian method. So you get, although they have a large athlete pool, you see people like Lou and quite a few lifters, they stay in it for quite a long time. They get taken care of. I'm not saying it's going to be for all of them, but definitely the top tier guys. There's some that have kind of drifted away from being number one ranked and then come back 5 or 6 years later. So their methods really take the best of both worlds. Whether or not they're taking the extra supplements is another question. But as Craig said, they're very, very hard on the technical side. And when some of our guys visited China a few years ago, there was a world champion who snatched 150. And after his whole training session, after his 2 hours of training, his coach made him snatch 50 kilos for another hour. And the coach stood there with a stick and shouted at him till it was perfect. And if I did that here, they would probably laugh at me. Jess, that's what we're doing next week. Okay. So, where are we today?
Please not. Please don't.
Oh, that's what you need.
Okay.
So, where are we today? So we've gone through the kind of the pre-drug era, where it was kind of safe, classic S&C, nothing too crazy, into this kind of really sport-specific heavy lifting, but also doesn't take into account the foundations that these guys already have. And what is worth noting is that in the USA, people like, is it Tommy Kono? He just took the Russian stuff over, and they weren't clean back then either. So you have to really think that what the US is delivering is kind of like and same with Westside, they just took those Russian manuals over. So you go straight to the Russian documents, you're kind of skipping the middleman and seeing that from that. And that's where we really want to step back and really look at what's possible and what's the climate we're in today. So with clean countries, we have to decipher the good parts of the drug era research. And I think the principles of overload and progression are obviously still number one for us. And looking at it from an individual point of view, we know that there are freaks out there. We got a guy called Steve Investman, who self-taught strength training, like a gym, bit of weightlifting to himself, and he could front squat 190, self-taught within like 2 years when he was 18 years old. You can't teach that kind of stuff. It's very genetic. Technical and physiological requirements of weightlifting mean that we can't really avoid the lifts. So we can't just do this GPP and expect a beginner to remember how to snatch. So I think all programs that we've looked at, maybe the Kazakh one's insane, but they do almost have a place. So, a short periods of Bulgarian, at least from a psychological point of view, has shown fantastic benefits to certain people getting used to heavier lifting, as long as it's not going to cause an injury. And there are freaks out there, as I said. But ironically, Zoe Smith can train 3 times a week and be pretty damn world class. So again, it is individual from that. And I think the kind of closing remark before we open up to any questions is really about the limited athlete pool and our duty of care as coaches that you guys all have. That we don't have the luxury of just injuring someone because we want to try and push them to the limit and see who comes out stronger at the end. So there's my recommended text. Just a few there to give you some interesting stuff. But yeah, that's me done, Craigie, and I'm glad you guys managed to stay with me for the whole time. No problem, Jim.
What I'll do, Kristian, is I'll grab that off you and I will push that out on the Insta if you're happy.
Yes, no problemo.
Other than that, we'll go back and firstly say thank you very much, and then open it out to any questions that anyone might have. If you want to unmute your mics.
Tumbleweed.
No questions at all. Perfect. Well, what I'll do whilst we're thinking of any questions, I have a poll. There should be a poll come up for any future subjects if anybody wants to have a look at any future subjects.
You're getting too cocky at this.
Well, you know, I had to go online and actually figure out how to actually do that because I am old as Dick. Oh, perfect. We've got them coming in already. Perfect. So I will say thank you very much to Kristian now. If anybody wishes to leave, you're more than welcome to leave. If you want to hang around and ask questions, you're more than welcome. I hope to have Kristian on a few more as we go. We've already discussed a couple that I'm pretty sure would come in quite nicely as well.
I hope it wasn't too confusing or too basic.
No, very good.
No, it's a good in between.
Aaron, you haven't told us what Mehmed told you once.
Yeah, so basically that was on your beaches and barbells at Brunel, weren't it?
First time we met.
Yeah. So I was getting ready for a PB, I think it was, and Mehmed comes up to me. I'm going to butcher his accent now because obviously you do it far better. And he goes, "Bar is plenty light, and you are plenty strong." And then it just really sort of stuck in my head. Do you know what I mean? Like the sort of mentality of it. But
and
obviously
the shit grammar as well is perfect.
Yeah, it was brilliant. I put it on the gym whiteboard, but the bar definitely didn't feel light. He got
it. He got it in PB.
Yeah.
And I told Mem, I said, whenever he's about to lift, I said, Mehmed, the bar is plenty light.
That is plenty light.
Plenty strong.
Yeah,
and then
exactly.
he tells me to F off.
Yes.
Because he knows how bad the English was back then as well.
Yeah. No, he's a
I'm
ledge.
going to take a picture of the poll just in case I absolutely cluster it. Oh. Right, you can vote for more than one. For those that are still voting, vote away. Clearly, you can see. Up again. You can. It should still be going.
Right, how do I see it?
I don't know whether there is a poll at the bottom.
Share screen. No.
I think Jess might be mugging you off, Kristian. He's worse than I am. If I share the screen, you won't be able to actually vote. That's right. We've got quite a good amount of votes in anyway.
So I found it.
Picture. You got it. Yeah. Are you going to vote for what you want to be doing?
I'm bench pressing technique, mate. Bench pressing technique. Mate. That's me.
Well, I stand by for a spider arch.
How did you get it up, Kristian?
There is a button to the left of chat. Polls came up. There's a button that says polls. I think. I don't know. Are you unless you're on the phone or something?
23 of 23 that are currently left in the conversation have voted. I think the one I was probably going to look at doing next week was probably the psychology of weight categorized sports, and probably looking at the psychology associated to what category you stay in, how that might affect your psychology, and certainly things that you brought up as you went through, Kristian, with things like how to cope with a weight category sport, plus having a job, plus studying, plus life and the stresses of life, and also
wanting
maybe
to look good on Instagram.
And the six-pack fam. Hey, Jess.
Standard. It draws.
Can I give some insight on the weight stuff?
Yeah, definitely.
From a judo point of view.
Oh, yes. Go.
And a female having a wonderful relationship with a dodgy coach beforehand.
Yeah. No, she wasn't that bad. She just wasn't aware.
I keep forgetting your background, Studio, so it'd be good to have you on as well, Jess, so that we can get your insight to that side of things as well.
Only if people are interested. Like if it doesn't.
Always.
Every area.
Oh. Thanks.
It'll draw.
Everyone for listening.
It'll draw well from that psychological